us as well. I'll be coming up to many of you personally to recruit you. Great. So thanks very much, everybody. And thanks, Janelle, for these land acknowledgements as well to keep us in the right frame of mind. We go now to Southeastern Europe, facing multiple pressures from economic recession, climate change, youth outmigration, Bosniak, which is Bosnian Muslim communities. Home gardeners nevertheless tend productive, small, a normal as an obvious means of subsistence, barter in the search for culturally understood good food. Less obviously, these gardens also anchor a diverse and a gray economy in the absence of essentially a formal state, formal market relations, structuring the series of exchanges that constitute what we would call social reproduction, the stuff that keeps everyday economic, social, and ecological life going in this region. That is to say, so much depends on having cucumbers to pass out when you've got too many of them. Through a combination of interviews, mapping, garden surveys, we're going to talk a little bit about how Bosniak gardens have contracted and yet still persisted in the face of tremendous odds, intense socio-political pressures, and local aspirations. So gardens and small allotments have long been favored spaces for people in this room and our scholarly comrades. We celebrate their capacity for fostering biodiversity, for strengthening community ties, for providing a space to practice and play with culinary and botanical traditions, for making a place where we can get outside and have some multi-species joy. In 2013, Joe Smith and Peter Jelichka coined this tongue-in-cheek term, quiet sustainability, to describe long-standing forms of food self-provisioning in Eastern European gardens against the loud sustainability of big state projects or technological fixes. Nature does not, generally speaking, publish articles that say group of well-meaning people continue doing good thing they were doing. Which is a shame, because these allotments and home gardens clearly accomplish all kinds of really important goals for we, the sustainable curious. Gardens bring together people for collective action. They produce significant, if not fully alternative, sources of food. They provide diverse habitats for living things. They help people enjoy themselves outdoors, all part of everyday life rather than some top-down or technocratic intervention. We presume we don't have to convince you in this room of this. However, we'd be happy to do so if you wish. The Zadruga program of state collectivization did not reshape Yugoslavian agrarian landscapes to the same extent that we might associate state collectivization with in other European socialist contexts. But other things have been at work nonetheless. In many ways, the same problems that rural communities have faced throughout the 20th century, waves of outmigration and wage work, the original Kautsky agrarian question, pulling smart kids off the farm because for 150 years, smart kids have been told, don't stay on the farm, move to a city. Speaking from the vantage of state statistics, agricultural productivity is low in contemporary Bosnia, in spite of creative efforts like agritourism, niche marketing cooperatives that struggle to build capital for farming households. 6% of Bosnia's GDP comes from agriculture, which is a little surprising given that around 60% of the population lives in rural agrarian settings. Bosnia is a net food importer, in part because that rural population doesn't move a whole lot of that food into the formal market. Fewer than 4% of households do farming as their main job at any kind of scale. Finally, there's a lot of uncertainty in land tenure, given the combination of outmigration, post-socialist reform, and land seizures during the genocidal war of the 90s. Whether or not it's a problem, and these communities are not commercializing every aspect of their being, is a matter of disciplinary perspective. Agricultural economists are aghast. Ethnobiologists, more flexible perhaps. To many in this room, it is a good thing rather than a giant problem that around a third of Bosnians produce significant amounts of their own food for their own local consumption. Rural Bosnian gardens and allotments see neither market income going out nor significant investment capital coming in, and so most households are already doing something agroecological-ish. producing their own means of soil fertility, crop management, biodiversity management as well. This is quiet sustainability. And in fact, for these rural Bosnian communities, there's these robust, dense gardens fuel a much wider, very important range of relations through debts, through gifts, through trades, through promises, obligations, all this stuff that provides the real, actual relationships between people, that is to say, the actual lived economy of living on Earth in these places. In a place with very little formal economic work, what J.K. Groups and Graham called the diverse economy. And they are especially helpful in describing this kind of economic iceberg, where we might focus a lot on the top, the formal wage work, but all of the things that make life meaningful really happen below the surface in that way. It's a nice way of flipping the script as well, in saying that what is important is not the narrow world of formal economic supply chains so much as how life actually gets conducted and value actually created in context. From this perspective, Bosnian gardens and allotments are important mechanisms that keep social institutions moving through mutual aid and ecological maintenance. Social reproduction, that is all the work it takes to make sure that it's possible for someone to leave their house and go to a job in the first place. Bosnian gardens provide meaningful contributions to food security through calories and good food, but just as, if not more importantly, all of this food anchors, it's the physical manifestation of this diverse economy, of bartering, of gifting in a place where labor is skilled and people have some means to produce, but cash and formal work is fairly rare. Gardens are the centers not just of homes, but the centers of this whole entire economy where people actually live. 2017 to 2022, we made several short trips to Teslic, Bosnia and Herzegovina to speak with Bosnian farmers and home gardeners and participate in agricultural work. Mostly folks who are relatives of colleagues that we know from St. Louis, Missouri, where with whom Ashley Glenn works as a PhD candidate and researcher at the Missouri Botanical Garden. In 2022, we surveyed 50 households in this multi-ethnic town at the border of the Bosniak Federation and Republika Srpska. Chats over coffee, interviews, the occasional farm chore. We collected information on actively used plant species, marked some geospatial data, and actually sketched diagrams of these fields, which you're going to see in just a moment.
Okay, so our data, it's no surprise that these gardens are dense and productive. Perennial food-bearing plants are the underlying foundation of a Bosnian village. To have a house is to have an orchard. Even as outmigration has turned many farmhouses into vacation homes, these lands produce. We see perennial plants at every home, mostly fruit trees. These orchards lie in wait for the time when the owner can come and enjoy the fruit and the shade they produce. In the meantime, neighbors tend the trees, collect the harvest, mow the grass for fodder, and occasionally add a temporary veg patch. For the houses that do have permanent residency, intense production is the standard. Every house has perennial fruit trees, of course, but in addition, and regardless of size of household or age of residence, every occupied house has a veg plot, with at least 11 types of annual food plants. Amongst our village, there was an average of 22 veg per household, not counting the perennial plants, with the most diverse having 42 types of annual food plants. This data is just a snapshot of the fields in July, so this doesn't include spring or fall crops or common plants that were admitted during this exceptionally dry year. We also marked high food redundancy throughout the village. Here we show the food plants found on these farms. These graphs include both the 39 occupied and the 11 unoccupied farms, either abandoned or just used as vacation homes temporarily. As you can see, every single farm, regardless of residency, had an apple tree. They usually, even unoccupied, had plum, cherry, and pear. In veg plots, it's easy to guess what heavy hitters we would encounter. Looking at the annual graph, if you omit the 11 unoccupied gardens that don't have annual plants, you can see the high redundancy of the top 9 plants. Interestingly, the plants that were most common were grown in the highest amounts. And amongst the least redundant, only wheat was produced in quantities to share. The rest were minor oddities for personal taste. There was very low specialization in plant choices, And what specialization we did encounter was more in tech, like one person owns a horse plow, one person owns a grain mill. From an efficiency view, this redundancy seems illogical, and yet the people we work with are highly pragmatic. What we learned is that even though this means increased labor, it is useful as a fail-safe. As an example, one day Andrew found a goat eating in a neighbor's garden. He scared it away, and we assessed the devastating damage. The neighbor, Aaliyah, has no husband and her children live far away, so she came to our house, to Dahlia's house where we were staying, to gather herself. Dahlia served her coffee and cake, gave her a cigarette, and held her hand while she cried and lamented her loss. Dahlia then made a package of many of the veg that was lost in her garden. Alia had some self-sufficiency in her garden. But in the wake of a catastrophic event, her existing social network came in to fill this gap. This is not a simple transaction. It is the safety net built of a lifetime of reciprocity and social and material exchange. Dahlia, as a relatively young, strong, and sociable woman, grows extra as a buffer for such needs, as her own labor allows. Dahlia began her orchard as soon as she married and moved onto her own land. This orchard contained early apple, eating apple, and cooking apple, pear, plum, peach, sour cherry, and eating cherry. As her family grew over the following 2 decades, she added more perennials, a veg field, and animals. She'd love for it to be bigger, to include all of her skills and needs, but she must leave some space for the sheep and cow to graze, to not tax her water table, and to not waste time, energy, or product. A calculation optimized by what she thinks will grow well, her time, how much the family needs to avoid waste but still have a guest buffer, and to feed the animals. And as people age beyond their peak farming abilities, they make decisions based on the size of their households and their own mobility in this hilly landscape. And gardens can contract in this, even as they remain in robust diversity.
To call attention to one aspect of that density, you're looking at a squash plant that's trained up an apple tree. So no space, no inch of soil wasted in these areas.
Which is a traditional way to dealing with space. So this day-to-day labor of the village is clearly and predominantly managed by women, most of them elderly. This is a relic of a traditional gendered division of labor, a Bosnian version of the second shift phenomena described by working women everywhere. While economic and societal swings through the Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Yugoslav, and modern era changed the work-life of men drastically, women's work in the field and kitchens maintains some cultural and biological continuity. Continuity here refers to arranging agricultural inputs like labor or seed or water, providing traditional meals and preserving foods to last through winter, making extra money by selling in local markets or cooperatives, and gifting food, labor, cigarettes, and coffee to maintain the flows of reciprocity and obligation that undergird Bosnian life. Despite, or rather because of this enormity of work and skill, it was clear that Bosnian women were lauded and respected for their role in providing cultural and nutritional foundation to the village. With the post-war economic depression that is still ongoing, we see generational splits in women's decision-making on the farm. As women reach old age and deal with decreasing ability, their gardens get smaller and closer to the home. Middle-aged women have as large a garden as they can manage and may switch to outside employment or try and balance both, with garden size reflecting changing economic and time allowances. Young women express conflict over whether to marry and go abroad, go to school and enter the workforce, or establish a farm, or some mix of these. Land tenure in Bosnia is complicated and uncertain. Staying and farming is seen as the surest way to protect ancestral land and continue cultural traditions. And now, I have that on my phone so you can play around. He's going to be flipping through some satellite images that we have, and the 3 farms that I'm talking about are the 3 circles here. With satellite imagery supplementing our interviews and observations, we can see the changes to the garden landscape as women age and grapple with these lifestyle decisions. Dahlia, with her husband's good construction job abroad and 2 strong children in their 20s, has been expanding her garden. Yes.
This circle here?
Yes. She's added sheep and cows and added grazing land and had her son build a hoop house. A grandmother down the street, has given up her wheat field and cows, reducing her labor to only a garden, but also her ability to sell milk and cheese in the market, which brought her money and great reputation. Another elderly woman reduced the size of her garden considerably and moved it closer to her home, but did not reduce the diversity, even if it means having just one plant of some vegetables. And this is an illustration of our data collection. This is the woman who made her garden closer to her home. This is about 20 by 30 meters. And so she can walk right out from her house and get her vegetables.
Neither evidence of collapse nor exceptional resistance. This is an effort to preserve foodways as a strategy to preserve life itself, rooted in Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, socialist, post-socialist regimes. The gardens remain, the homes remain, the people remain, the community remains, all anchored through the trade of tomatoes and cucumbers and potatoes, coffee and cigarettes. To have a house is to have a garden, is to have a community. To return to the keynote from last night, what these gardens do in real life is enable access to a community that is defined through these dense webs of reciprocity. This is the real economy. This is persistence across the collapse of a state, the collapse of a market, and climate change, all of which speak to the importance of knowing sustainability, even when it's quiet, when we can see it. Thanks very much. Yeah, I saw Daniela first. But where are we?
Yeah, we'll talk about this for the rest of the week.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, guys. That was terrific. I'm wondering about, is there any organized exchange of knowledge, kind of like equivalent to our garden clubs, right? Where there could be, because you talked about a cooperative and then you talked about community. I'm wondering if it's more informal or if it's true, if there's opportunities for young people to kind of be inspired by older people in the community to stay.
So I'll say that we were struck by the fact that no one could give us an example when the entire village comes together. But the kind of bodega at the beginning of the village is where people kind of informally will hang out and learn things, and trade seeds and do that kind of stuff. Oh, sorry. During the Yugoslav era, there was really strong and seemingly successful cooperatives of farms that people in post-Yugoslavian Bosnia have not recreated on their own. So kind of no, really, unless Andrew has a different way of saying it.
I think what the question brings out is something that we as people who love to talk about food and love to talk about plants and people's relationship with them always need to be attuned to, which is the larger political and economic context in which these relationships can be made possible. The Yugoslavian state collapses in the 90s with the result of a horrific and genocidal war. And the resulting state that emerges in 95 is one that did not resolve some of the political difficulties of that. And so for that reason, there is this great weight of political disenfranchisement that would disrupt some of the fundamental structures of things like an agricultural extension service or garden clubs or state schools, where we might are the formal institutions that we might normally look to that would preserve that. And so instead, I think the manifestation of that are village level gardens and family level and friend level exchanges, not all of which break across the religious or the so-called ethnic divides that are across Yugoslavia, like Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, because it's not quite so neat as that simple story would have us believe. But if we're going to talk about plants and community, we also have to talk about genocide and fascism as things that disrupt the ability to exist in the web of life.